Safe spaces on college campuses, trigger warnings in course syllabi, bias reporting teams that report students and faculty for using terms or promoting ideas that might be considered offensive to some. Many colleges today are removing standardized testing as a requirement for admission. And rampant grade inflation undermines the understanding of whether a student has mastered a subject. I'm Richard Nelson, and you are tuned in to The Commonwealth Matters. A new book suggests that American universities are collapsing. It's called Conformity Colleges, The Destruction of Intellectual Creativity and Dissent in America's Universities, which is the topic of our conversation today. The author is Professor David Barnhizer, Professor Emeritus of Law at Cleveland State University. He's also served as a research fellow at the University of London's Institute of Advanced Legal Studies and visiting professor at the Westminster University School of Law. David, welcome to the Commonwealth Matters program.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm going to start out, by the way, I read your book. I've got it right here, which I think it's just hot off the press. I became aware of it recently. Great read. I've read probably close to 2/3 of it. I'm going to start out with actually several things that I found interesting, maybe startling is a better word, in your book. And you begin in the first chapter by really outlining some of the problems, if we can call them that, at our universities. So, for example, since 2015, an organization called FIRE documented 600 attempts to sanction scholars for protected speech. Most of those sanctions have been successful. 50% of those sanctions have occurred since 2021. By the way, much of that has been directed against conservative speech or ideas that did not fall within mainline progressive, and I use that term in air quotes, orthodoxy. 36 tenured professors were fired for their scholarship or their pedagogy. Now, I'm curious, are these isolated cases, or would you say that this is representative of the climate at most of our colleges and universities today?
Well, when you think of them, they're the cases that were pursued. A lot of cases, the faculty and administrators, for that matter, they can't stand what's going on. Just like in K through 12 systems where you have a lot of retiring teachers who are fed up with the political orthodoxy. They can't stand what's going on, but the movement people are so vicious. I wrote a book published in 2021 called Uncanceling America, and that provided 600 examples across a number of institutions. It's infiltrated the entire culture, and it has intimidated. The people who are doing it have worked their way into some of the top power positions in universities and school boards and the like. And they are intimidating people, so they don't have, FIRE is an amazing group. I mean, I have great respect for them. But that's just the tip of an actual repressive iceberg. I mean, because a lot of people just won't talk. I just got I spent the last week interacting with a student who's a first-year medical student in a school I won't say, for her protection, but she sent me an email and said, can you give me some advice? Because I have found out, I read a review of the book, the Conformity Colleges book, and I thought you might have some ideas about what's going on. So we exchanged over the last 4 or 5 days a series of emails analyzing it. And she said what she found in lectures and classes and the like is this mindless insistence on a one-sided interpretation of very important issues and of an absolute lack of tolerance for anything that is different from what the mainstream thesis is. Because what they're dealing with right now, they're talking about the failure of lesser religion in the United States, less people feeling affirmatively religious and having a sort of faith. Well, what has been going on, just like with Karl Marx and Lenin and the like, is they've they said religion is terrible. It's an opiate of the people, et cetera, et cetera. They created their own religion, and they react just with heresy and heretics and excommunication of the people who don't share their views or who dare to say anything that offends it. So what has happened is that people, teachers, intellectuals, the people we trusted to advance these ideas, and students, that they simply play it safe and don't question what's going on. They question it in their mind. They don't question it verbally because of the consequences. And that is what the medical school student and I went through. And she said, thank God, right at the end, about the fifth interaction, she said, besides thank you, she said, she actually has identified some other students who share her views, and you would call them conservative. She did, but it's really the same thing mine are. I'm not a conservative. I am a strong believer in America's ideals and in social justice, and have spent my life as not only a law professor, but a civil rights lawyer and social justice person, activist in the United States and in England and in a lot of Mongolia and Bangladesh and Thailand and Malaysia, Latin America. So I am not taking that crap from anybody. That's what it comes down to.
David, before we got on the program here, you mentioned that you don't like to be labeled. I don't like to be labeled either. But and the reason why this is important to this conversation is because it's often attributed to conservatives who are going to point out wrongs at our universities or in our liberal institutions. But you're not approaching it from a partisan political perspective, are you? You're approaching what's happening at our universities, particularly with cancel culture and if I could use this term, illiberality. The effect that this has had on free thought and the free exchange of ideas at our universities, essentially had a chilling effect. According to a survey in 2017, they found that nearly half of all U.S. college students were reluctant to speak out about politics out of fear of offending their peers. 34%, so a little over 1 out of 3 college students in this country were afraid of offending their professors. And 30% stopped themselves from sharing an idea or opinion because they feared that other students might find their views offensive. So we have what's supposed to be an institution where you have the free exchange of ideas, where there's discussion and dialogue and debate. There's really, it's not happening there like it used to. My question is, how do we begin to restore a climate of the free exchange ideas on our college campuses?
Well, some people get mad at me. First thing to do is do what some states are doing and remove funding for political speech. And by that, I don't mean political speech. What I really mean is the skewed, distorted speech that's being advanced by the DEI people. It's divisive. It's totally divisive. And I have many people I have worked with in my life who are good friends, and it's not the classic, they're friends. I have a lot of people I have worked with for whom I have great respect and liking and appreciation, and they are Black, or they are Hispanic, or Latino, or Asian. And so I don't buy the BS that goes into that. And I have dealt with the cultures on a very basic level as clients, as social justice people that I'm trying to help. I was the attorney for Cleveland's Black on Black Crime Committee. I was the only white person there in that because they needed somebody to help them with the legal stuff, and they trusted me to do it. That's the problem. You have, at this point, you don't have what used to be a lot of people who were striving for that goal, that ideal of knowledge, progress, opportunity, merit, earn your way, get help, with your way. I didn't disagree with many aspects of the affirmative action movement. I think it's been abused. I think it's created a bureaucracy, which then in colleges and universities translated and became the DEI administrations because they're really running many universities. Because academics and even many students are terrified of being labeled or referred to as a racist. And that is the Orwellian club that is being used. And you can't question it. You can't question. You go to experience, their experience. Well, a lot of people have experiences too. A lot of people have bad experiences too. You have to respect it. You have to understand it. You have to have compassion in appropriate instances. But as a generalized, overarching theme, that if you say anything about it, you are a bad person, or question it, it is sick. It is really a kind of intellectual, anti-intellectual sickness, and it's racist. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but it's racist the way it is unfolding.
David, there were two bills introduced in the Kentucky legislature this past session that pushed back against DEI at Kentucky colleges and universities. Today, as we record, this is the last day of session, and they're expected to take a vote on one of these bills. Not sure what will happen. But opponents say that if you oppose DEI at colleges and universities, that number one, it could hurt federal funding, but number two, that it chills speech in the college classroom. You're saying something different, that DEI chills speech, if I heard you correctly. So let's talk about that for a moment. How DEI, of course, stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think most agree that diversity in itself is not inherently wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. I think we can agree that inclusion, the idea of opening our colleges to anybody who can get in, if they've got the grades and wherewithal to get into college, they should be welcomed. But I think the problem, as I understand it, is the E in the DEI. It's the equity, which essentially is equal outcomes. It's not equal opportunity as you enter, but it's equal outcomes as students are going through or exiting. Is that a similar way that you see it, or are you seeing some other things here too?
Well, I think it's interesting. I believe to a degree in every one of those three. First of all, I'd say diversity, it really is not functioning in a way that it's creating real diversity. It has a view politically for a certain couple identity groups, and they are using the mantra of diversity to privilege themselves. At the same time, they're accusing the rest of the system of functioning according to privilege. So diversity is being abused. I agree with, of course I want diversity. I believe in it. But I want an honest diversity. I want an honest inclusion. And I would apply the same logic and rationale to how inclusion is being implemented in fact, not in terms of what it should stand for and what we think it does stand for, because that's the manipulation that's going on, because they are deep values of social justice. Of course, we agree with them. And then the people who are advancing them in the DEI systems and the genderist systems, they in fact use the emotional power in their narrative to make people agree with them. And if you don't agree with them, you're immoral. And that. Now you go to the idea of equity. There is no system in the world that has ever made the people in that system, everybody gets everything at the same amount. And in the DEI movement, in this movement, they try to do away with the idea of merit. They try to do the words of lack of opportunity. If you read the book, you see all the words, the fundamental words that we use to describe what made sense to give people rights as part of the civil rights movement. And I was involved in the civil rights movement as a lawyer. It made sense. But again, it's not what's really going on. So when they talk about these efforts to shut down DEI in its present characterization, because it will inhibit speech, free speech. Well, get real. It's, the system, the way it's functioning right now, you just said the statistics, they're even a little bit worse by now. But it's already done that. That's why the people are not speaking. That's why they're not talking. That's why the medical student that I communicated with said she asked in a class of hundreds, she asked a question about why are we talking about capitalism and certain kinds of things in a medical school right now as a critique. And the person teaching it just simply said, we'll have to agree to disagree. No discussion, no dialogue, no explanation, just that you better agree with that. And then she's afraid of being typed. And she also told me that secretly, and this is a good thing, secretly, a number of the other teachers, the teachers there also don't like what's going on, but they're afraid to talk about it. So that is where the suppression of free speech and free intellectual interchange is coming from.
Kentucky is at a crossroads. We can choose to give in to the radical left, or we can choose to engage the culture in a God-honoring way.
I started the Commonwealth Policy Center because I believe that Christians have a responsibility to influence government and society to the glory of God. While the Commonwealth Policy Center's made a significant impact, our work isn't finished. If you'd like to join our movement working for timeless values, then head to our website.
To learn more, go to commonwealthpolicycenter.org.
If you're just joining us, you're tuned in to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm Richard Nelson here with David Barnhizer, and we're talking about his book, Conformity Colleges, The Destruction of Intellectual Creativity and Dissent in America's Universities. David, you give several examples of hostility directed towards different ideas, towards others who don't think in conformity, if you will, as your title implies, Conformity Colleges. But you give an example of 17 threats, punishments, and harassment towards university professors for sharing ideas that are outside of the progressive orthodoxy. You gave 7 examples of serious breakdown of civility at our universities, including one at Yale where there was a guest speaker who fantasized, as part of her lecture, fantasized about killing whites. When did that become acceptable at our universities? You don't, if that person was speaking to a business board or speaking at a town hall or another place, they would be roundly condemned. Now, this is a story I became aware of some time ago, but it certainly wasn't picked up by mainstream news outlets. Why is this kind of behavior in speech, hostile and dangerous speech, violent speech, why is that tolerant or tolerated at our universities?
Because, first of all, you talk about Ivy League universities like Yale, uh, the faculty and administration generally is overwhelmingly dominated by the left, and all the data shows it. I mean, I'm not just accusing them or making that up or pulling it out of space. Up into the 90% of political orientations, party registration, and the like are left in that. And in many of them, because the reality is that many academics, and I'm very different from most academics because I've done a whole lot of different things. Uh, but many academics have almost no real human experience. They get there, they do well, they get good grades, they go to the right schools. They get locked into, and most of those are Ivy League. Many of them are Ivy League for the top echelon in terms of the prestige aspect of it. They get that. They get automatic respect. They get streamlined into good jobs in government and in other places, in big law firms and the like. Even there, they don't do much. They get very little human experience. And an example is I continually think about it because I've been in 35 countries and worked with a lot of people that you would call grassroots people in developing nations in that. And when I see people like Hillary Clinton or John Kerry or Blinken or the like, they never talk to the real people in those countries. They never communicate with them. They only interact with the wealthy and powerful elites in those countries who their mission is to hold on to their wealth and hold on to their power and their prestige. So that's what happens in academia. You have people who basically talk to each other, and they don't base their decisions or what they teach on reality. I guess it's their reality, but they don't base it on the overwhelming content of real human and diverse. They talk about diversity, but real human and diverse reality that people go through and suffer through.
Sure. And if I could add, including diverse political perspectives as well, which I would say that's terribly lacking at our universities. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And it is, just like I said earlier, it's a religion. It is, they're supposed to do it, and they lack the courage as individuals. I believe in individualism. This movement does not. I believe in community also, but I believe that each of us has the duty and responsibility to develop ourselves as well as we can and contribute to the community, not just be part of a collective mob that just parrots.
David, you shared an example of a woman who escaped from North Korea, Yeonmi Park. She eventually enrolled at Columbia University, and she was surprised to find this atmosphere that you and I are talking about, an anti-intellectualism, anti-individualism, you can't think outside the box. But she said that the first thing that she learned after being at Columbia for some time was that every problem was because of white men. And she said that literally she crossed the Gobi Desert to be free. And then she realized at Columbia University, she's not free. In fact, she went so far as to say that America is not free. How alarming to hear those words. Somebody who lived under the tyranny of a communist dictator to come here, one of our most prestigious universities, and then to say, look, you're not free here. And she was accused and attacked because she thought outside the box. She did not think in lockstep with progressive activists.
Well, a lot of people don't really want to be free. They want to feel part of something. They don't want to spend a lot of time thinking or struggling with the bond, the chore of becoming free as a human being or as part of a community. They just want to be taken care of, and they want to be part of a group.
So perhaps that's one of the frailties of human nature, putting our minds on the shelf in order to become part of a group. You had mentioned actually several topics you cover here, but one is grade inflation. In 1960, only 15% of the grades at our colleges and universities were A's. Today, 45% of all grades given are A's. What does grade inflation do to the value of a degree or to a student's report card?
Well, potential employers are now trying to devise ways of actually evaluating the people who are applying, because the reality to them, and you will see the reports on this all over the place, the reality is that they don't trust any of the grade. Somebody can come with them 3.8, 3.9, something like that. What courses they took, there are a lot of courses that are almost automatic. B pluses, A's. If they don't get an A minus, at least they're upset. Even Harvard Law School, when I was there, I was a teaching fellow one year, and I gave one of my clinical students a D because he just screwed off the entire semester. I warned him repeatedly, but it was beneath his dignity to do the work. I gave him a D, and Harvard changed his grade to B plus, because Harvard at that time, long time ago, had a B plus curve It's it's worse than that now. So what you're dealing with in the great inflation are for employers and for people who are thinking, I'm going to evaluate the student in traditional ways. There's very little of that going on anymore. It's monopoly. It's like monopoly money. The degrees are like monopoly money that, it looks pretty, but it isn't worth anything. And the Ivies are in trouble. I was talking to the president of a university last week or the week before, and we were talking because we interact on this kind of stuff. And we were talking about it. He said, they made their bed. It's almost like even the prestige value is going down. And the only thing I can tell you that they had going for them was, for decades now, was the prestige value of having that name on your degree. Now, a lot of people have caught up to the game.
I think you could argue, too, with the way that Harvard's former president, Claudine Gay, performed before the Congressional Committee recently, where she could not bring herself to condemn anti-Semitism. Harvard lost a lot of stock in the eyes of people when she played these word games and danced around what students were doing, clearly anti-Semitic, clearly hostile, clearly just awful what was being said there towards the Jewish students at Harvard. And of course, she lost her job.
Well, she's still making $900,000 a year.
And maybe more people need to know what the professors and administrators are making there and what they're teaching. And I think when more people know, especially the donors, alum from the university, when they realize what is going on, perhaps they will pull back on their donations. I want to give another example of the dumbing down at our universities. Professor of chemistry at New York University, Maitland Jones, who taught a rigorous chemistry course. He was a rigorous teacher. He had high expectations, but a large number of his students weren't getting very good grades. So the students put together a petition and they complained to the university administration that his course was too hard. And the administration eventually caved. And instead of telling the students they need to study harder, they terminated Professor Jones. And I'll go back to something I asked earlier. Is this an outlier, or are we seeing more of these examples of where academic standards are dumbed down to meet the demands of the students?
Well, it demands of the students, yes. But one of the things is that the birth rate and the student population, plus the reaction to the incredible overpricing of university education also, there's really competition to get students now that they never had to go through in the same way before. Most schools that were pretty well regarded. Now they're terrified because we haven't talked about K through 12 education, but you'll see that in the book too, which is that the students are being brainwashed, many of them in K through 12, by the same people who were taught, and I would say the soft kinds of courses, sociology, that kind of thing, political science, sociology, women's studies, critical race studies, that kind of thing. Not serious, disciplined, scientific or technical courses. And I believe in philosophy and all that. I mean, I've taught jurisprudence and taught philosophy, so I'm not decrying it. What I'm saying is that you'll find most of the political figures teaching in universities and in the teacher schools. They represent this movement, and so they teach the new younger teachers, and they've really advanced that the last 10, 15 years. Then those people go to the schools and teach the kids. And they also infiltrate and infest the school boards and the administrations. And so you have a self-generating, self-reinforcing system. So it's not just the universities. The universities are key actors, but this is a dynamic that has been going on for over 30 years.
Very good. If you're just joining us, again, I'm Richard Nelson here with David Barnhizer. His book is called Conformity Colleges, The Destruction of Intellectual Creativity and Dissent in America's Universities. David, another example of dumbing down at our colleges comes from Professor, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this correctly, but Asao Inoue, who argued that it's wrong for composition instructors to require minority, especially Black students, to write in standard English. He says that things should be made more equitable, and in order to do so, he's adopted what he calls a labor-based grading system where grades depend on the amount of effort students supposedly put into the assignment, not on the quality of their writing. And many of our educational leaders agree and insist that grades be assigned to advanced group equity and not to reflect individual achievement. So how does this help the Black population or other minority students if you're going to base their grade on how much labor they put into it, not on the results or the outcome of what they studied?
And the idea has been around for a long time, but if you look at that, you have to differentiate the awful conditions that minority students, many of them Black, face in the urban public schools in cities of significant population. In every instance, the public schools in our major cities, all they're doing is free passes. They have a huge absenteeism rate. They have people who don't know how to discipline themselves. They have violence in the schools. They have kids attacking each other and their teachers, for that matter. They're educational wastelands. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but in every instance, basically, that I have seen in New York, Chicago, Baltimore, St. Louis, Austin, LA, they're doing the same kind of thing. They're betraying the children that they profess that they are advancing. They're not educating them. They're de-educating them. They're letting them go. And you tell me, what kind of skills? The movement against any standard of quality, any requirement of producing something that even the kid could take pride in, is such a betrayal of the young minority child. And every time somebody tries to do something about it, the teachers' unions get in the way because they control that system, and they can use their leverage to punish teachers, or leverage, as they did in the COVID situation. It's been very well documented that the schools were closed almost 2 years in many instances, more than ever needed to be done. So it's a joke, it's a farce, it's a lie.
One thing that's important to make clear, David, is that in your book, you say that you're not against the university. In fact, you believe that the university is a driving force for human creativity, health, and diversity of our political community, and that the institution must be saved from the intellectual and spiritual corruption that's taking place. I think we can extend this to our K through 12 education, as we were just talking about as well. The education system is here to serve people, to help us to develop our minds, to realize our God-given capacity to pursue what God has put before us. But we're seeing instead the university, and in many cases, K through 12, shortchanging our young people. Where do we begin? And I want to pivot the remainder of our conversation as to what are the consequences of dumbing down education, of higher ed in particular, having this cancel culture and really having this uniformity of thought and rejecting a diversity of opinion, rejecting this idea of the free exchange of ideas, free speech principles. What are some of the consequences of what's happened to higher ed in particular today?
First, basically, it deliberately avoids teaching people to think. The interaction we're having right now, we're thinking. We don't have to agree on everything, but we're thinking and we're referring to specific things and we're thinking about the implications of it. All they want to do is take the system apart, and they are in control, and they're doing it for purposes of personal and collective identity group power. And that's why they, as Yeonmi Park said when she went to Columbia, this thing about all the problems of the world are caused by white men. That is absolute, and pardon my language, but that's bullshit. And there are all kinds of people who've done bad things everywhere, all over the world, and there are all kinds of people who've done good things all over the world. And for them to go into what is supposed to be a system of analysis and thought and critique and synthesis, bringing things together, taking them apart, seeing the truth of things. For them to do that, they're betraying not only the students, the entire society. Because one of the flaws we have here, one of the functions of the educational system, and certainly increasingly the university, is to generate the knowledge base and ideas for people throughout the society across generations. So we can talk to each other about real history, not the 1619 thing, corrupted history, but real. You want to talk about real Black history, the reality of slavery that has been all over the damn world, and it's been all over the damn world centuries before the first person got shipped from the west coast of Africa, because Ghana went into the inner parts of Africa, captured people, and they are the ones that created the Western Atlantic slave trade. And, our idiots bought them. But, don't think that there's not a complex thing, a complex fact-based historical analysis that needs to be done, that they're deliberately trying to avoid doing because it doesn't fit their power mantra and could get in the way and undermine their ability to achieve the goals they're trying to achieve.
Right. And of course, just having a different opinion on that topic, that's going to lead to you being labeled a racist and perhaps me being labeled a racist for having this conversation. But it's a conversation that we need to have, isn't it? To be able to talk about the causes of slavery and in modern racism. Look, there is racism today, but is it not equally racist to say, for the professors at Columbia University, to say, well, all the problems in the world are created by white men? So here's some of the consequences of higher ed failing its mission that you mention in your book. You have a number here. You say that when education is corrupted, that the degrees become hollow, that they become meaningless. You mentioned this or alluded to this earlier. You also said that private and online venues will grow and fill a need. Let's talk about that for a moment. Are we seeing alternatives to higher ed emerge, either online or new universities coming online?
Yes, it's still early, but it's not only universities. There is that the University of Austin, that the new one that was created. Who knows what it's got some good people involved in it. Who knows what it's really going to have an effect on. Hillsdale College in Michigan really is trying to push back against the flood. Grove City College in Pennsylvania also. And I think there is enough beginning political response by other sources than the traditional media, legacy media. There is enough of a response that there is a beginning, I think, emergence of a chance to buffer or resist what's going on. There are in business, one of the strong things are in the business world, after George Floyd in Minneapolis, after his death, this whole explosive thing started. It was used as a justification for some really bad stuff. And a lot of corporations created knee-jerk, gave a lot of money to DEI and knee-jerk reaction. A lot of corporations also hired DEI in their human resources departments, and the Biden administration is seeking to do this kind of education mandated throughout the federal government. There's resistance coming in. There are a lot of people who are now being removed from the corporate hiring. It's disappearing to a fairly substantial degree at the corporate level. If in fact there is a change in the presidential administration policies after November, then I expect that there will be a dramatic reaction that hits the federal agencies in that, including the Department of Justice, which has become as corrupted as I've ever seen it. Makes me glad I didn't originally take the honors position out of law school to work for the Department of Justice, because I worked a lot of time in Washington and discovered that federal bureaucracies are themselves power trip situations, and the longer people are in them, the more controlling and basically dumber. They may have been specialists and great, like Tony Fauci. Maybe he was at some point in his life, but now he is nothing but a political bureaucratic hack, and he had been for years. So there has to be that, and there is a movement responding, and part of the thing that has to occur is basically a lot of people who are afraid of being accused of bad behavior, what I'm saying, like me, have to be, I'm not going to do it on the screen, have to be prepared to flip off the people who are pulling this game on you.
Some other consequences of higher ed failing in its mission include students seeking vocational training alternatives. One of the fascinating developments in higher ed is that we see a huge decrease in the number of males who are going on to four-year colleges. 20 years ago or so, I believe it was about 60% of higher ed. It was males. Today it's 40%. There's been about a 20% decrease of males going to higher ed, and they are going to vocational training.
Richard, go back to Yeonmi Park's Columbia statement about she found out that it was all the problem of white men. Well, that is what has been going on in our culture, and it starts in grade school, and the way boys are treated, and the way the systems then almost assume, I'm not going to use a word, but white men are now the only group in the country, other than Jews, I guess, only group in the country who you can say something really bad about, and people will, oh, that's okay, you're right.
And that's appalling. As we approach public policy at the Commonwealth Policy Center, we believe that all human beings have dignity, that we're all made in the image of God, and to broad brushstroke any group of people, whether it's white males or Asians or Latinos or Blacks, any broad brushstroke that would demean any of those people groups is an affront to being made in God's image. And I think that that's where we need to say enough. If you're going to demean one group, what will stop you from demeaning other groups? Which is the next group? And here in America in particular, we have this idea that we're a melting pot, that we have equal opportunity before the law. The law should be applied equally, and there are equal opportunities. And yet we have come to a place where it's okay to label groups and to attack groups. And there's a silence there, though, because you don't really see many white men organizations holding their fists up saying enough. Why is, and I'm not advocating that, but would you say, David, that there's a fear for people to speak up? The white men that are accused of being the cause of all problems, are we in a state of fear, not just at the universities, but in this culture?
Yes, we are.
David, we are running out of time. I'd like to try to close on a positive note. What are some positive developments that we're seeing happen because again, the universities have turned, and many of them, not all, but many, and it seems to be the trend where they have a cancel culture. They're dumbing down education. They are not tolerant to diversity of opinions or views. We're not educating our young people like we're supposed to. But what are some of the positive developments that you see happening?
Well, one is homeschooling. One is school choice. One is the educational experiments that we just discussed. Um, one is I'm not arguing total removal of DEI, but what I'm saying, there has to be a serious examination of that, and a lot of the funding has to be taken away. And it shouldn't be supposedly just race based on that. That's one of the mistakes and the flaws, because the dominance is that the people who are hired, they're it's the best job as a DEI administrator that they're probably ever going to have. And it's the best paying job. And because they're hired to root out discrimination and racism throughout the university, they have to do something. I mean, people don't understand how much money, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars are paying for DEI or affiliated uh, administrations. So that the money, you dry up fairly substantial, intelligently dry it up, focus dry it up. That will help weaken the effort very much. Um, but there are other things. One of the things you just said it. Like, I'll put it this way. It just popped into my mind. When I was a young law professor, I ran the clinical program at Cleveland State, and a lot of my students were Black. And one of my students and I were coming back from a case, a criminal case that in Cleveland, and he was 6'5" and 245 pounds or so, and played football very well at Grambling University. And he's Black, and we're walking along, and he turns to me and says, "David, I never said this to anybody else, but I always promised myself I would kill a white man." And I said, "That's very interesting, Jim." I mean, I'm not a midget. I'm 6'4" and 220, but he was something else. And I said, "Assuming it's not me, well, let's talk about that." And he said, "Until I worked with you, I had never had a white person treat me like a man, give me my dignity, show that I was a real human person to him. And you did that. And so I just wanted to thank you for what I just haven't told hardly anybody about this, but I just wanted to thank you for doing that. It really changed, I think, who I am. It changed me too, to some degree, in various ways. But what I'm saying is I was on a panel for Texas Southern University about 2 years ago, and I was the token white person on the panel, and it was about the topic was about the woman's white whatever the hell it is, and they said, "What was your what would you say about the first question to me? What would you say is the problem with race relations?" And I said, "It's because in America we are so separated and have been that we don't actually spend time with people who are different very much, most of us, from us. Not in a human, personal way. You might work with them a little bit, you might do that, but we don't spend time with each other as people so that we can gain an appreciation of them as a person. It could be as a bad person, it could be a good person, could be a wonderful person, could be, you know, just like ordinary person." And they agreed with that. And I think that is one of the flaws that has hampered this movement in America, that we have not enough interactions, human interaction, being able to evaluate ourselves in each other as people, not as a white man, not as a black man, or the like. That to me is the fundamental thing that we really need to focus on. And for God's sake, that is exactly what DEI and that bullshit destroys, because it's predicated on victimhood and you're the oppressor and oppressed. Okay. Now, all that does is tear us apart when we need to be able to see each other as real individual human beings.
So, David, what I'm hearing perhaps is, and we'll have to close on this idea, perhaps it's a call to action to each of us to get out of our comfort zone, to get to know others around us, starting in our own neighborhoods, because we don't know who lives across the street from us or a couple houses down from us, but to truly get to know them, introduce ourselves, get off of our iPads and smartphones and talk to them. And maybe bring a neighbor a plate of cookies or something, and get to know them as a human being, and not to see them by their skin color or their gender, but as human beings. And I think that would be a good place to start. David, this has been an enjoyable conversation. I appreciate you joining us on the Commonwealth Matters. Again, your book, Conformity Colleges, The Destruction of Intellectual Creativity and Dissent in America's Universities. I think we found this on Amazon. Is that the best place to get it?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's on a bunch of sites, but Amazon is probably the easiest.
Very good. Well, we appreciate your time. It's been good having you on the Commonwealth Matters program.
Thank you, Richard.